two aspects of this topic on environmental management, chapter 9. Please, once the subscribe button pop up, I need you to subscribe and please recommend this channel to your colleagues and friends. So let's start with the content. Let's see. In our previous class, we stopped at the process of photosynthesis under 9.1 natural ecosystem and human activities. So we've been able to cover this aspect of photosynthesis from here. We were able to cover from this aspect. Sorry, I'm still trying to learn how to use the pen tool. So we covered here upward. So from here, we're going to start from this part downwards today. And for this section, we're going to finish the syllabus content 9.1. Then the third part of the video, we're going to look at syllabus content 9.2. And that will be the end of chapter 3. So we just have 3 videos that will cover the whole topic on chapter 9. So quickly, for this video, we should be able to describe energy flow. So this is what we're doing. We'll be able to describe energy flow using food chain, food web, and trophic level. So we're going to describe it using a food chain, a food web, and a trophic level. So what the syllabus expects you to know is to be able to describe the processes that happens within a food chain, a food web, and a trophic level. So basically, a food chain is a chart showing the flow. It shows the flow of energy from one organism to the next, and it usually begins with a producer. For example, we have a food chain here, and this organism that trusts here that start the food chain is usually referred to as the producer. So the producer usually start the food chain. The producer. Then the organisms that feed on producers are called the primary consumers. They are the primary consumers. So the organisms that feed on primary consumers are the secondary consumers. Secondary consumers. While organisms that feed on the secondary consumers are referred to as tertiary consumers. And the major source of energy for this food chain is sunlight. Now, sunlight, because this organism will be able to photosynthesize using carbon dioxide, CO2, and water to make glucose and oxygen. Now, if you watch our previous video, you should be able to explain that process of photosynthesis. Now, the arrow in a food chain means, this arrow here means energy flow. It means energy flow. So, I've seen questions where they will ask you what the arrow represents. It means energy flow. So a food chain is a chart that showing the flow of energy, food, from one organism to the next, beginning with the producer. Now, you see a food chain here. I'll have to relate this particular food chain to explain the concept of trophic level and also relating it to a food web. Now, you see a food chain is the simplest path that energy takes through an ecosystem. Now, energy enters from the sun, and each level is the transfer of energy. Each level in the transfer of energy is a trophic level. Each level in the transfer of energy is referred to as a trophic level. Now, you can also say a trophic level is the position, an organism. An organism occupy in a food chain, or web. Simple. So the position an organism occupy in a food chain or web is usually referred to as the trophic level, and each level is the transfer of energy, just like what the individual arrows represent. So you find out that the first trophic level is usually the producer, and the second trophic level is usually the primary consumer, and the third and fourth trophic level is usually the tertiary and quaternary consumers. Now, if we look at a sample of a food chain, let's say we have grass, and grass is eaten by a grasshopper, sorry, which is eaten by the grasshopper is eaten by let's say a bird. Now, in this case, you find out that the producer here is the first trophic level, TL. The grasshopper is the second trophic level, while the bird is the third trophic level. So any other organism as it continues, that's how the number continues. Now, when we look at food web, I'll begin to explain that certain organisms occupy more than one trophic level in a food chain. So quickly, and you need possibly here introduce some new keywords. Autotrophs are organisms that make their own food. Herbivores are organisms that feed on autotrophs, and they're referred to as heterotrophs. And even other organisms are referred to heterotrophs, and that's where you look at omnivores, carnivores, and herbivores. We've looked at that in our previous video. Now, food web. A food web represents many interconnected food chains. So, the key word here is that the food web is an interconnected food chain describing various paths that energy takes through an ecosystem. So, a food web is, if you can't remember the word interconnected, you can put combination. Sorry. It's a combination of food chain. Now, looking at this example here, I think I got this from a past exam paper. Here, the plant is the producer. Now, we have three different primary consumer here. So the elk is, let me use PC, primary consumer. The insect here is also a primary consumer. The small rodent is a primary consumer. However, you find out that these wolves here represent a secondary consumer. Why? Because it feeds on a primary consumer called elk. Now, this line here represents a trophic, a food chain, a single food chain with three trophic level. So you can write a food chain here called plant to elk to what? Wolves. Now, this is one. Now, if you follow this lane, the plant is also eaten by insects. So we can also have another food chain called plant that is eaten by what? Insect. That is also eaten by small birds. Let me use SB, please. Then eaten by owl. Then eaten by LYNX. So how many trophic level do we have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 trophic level. So you see, in exam, they might ask you to identify an organism that occupies 2 different trophic level on a food web. Now, if you look at the owl here, it occupies two different trophic level. Why? Because it feeds on 2 different animals here. So it feeds on a small rodent, which is in a second trophic level. So the O can be in a third trophic level based on it feeding on a small rodent. Also, it can be on a first, second, third, on a fourth trophic level because it feeds on small birds. And in this case, small bird is in a third trophic level. Because if you have to count it, 1, 2, 3, then owl is 4. So the owl occupies 2 different trophic levels because it feeds on both rodent and small birds. So this is how you interpret it. So in that question, they might ask you draw a food chain that has 5 trophic levels. So you now look at the food web and you'll be able to bring it up. Now, if I want to draw a food chain that have 4 trophic levels, I can decide to start with plant, small rodent, a whistle and a lynx. That's 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. You can decide to go this way: plant, small rodent, foxes, and lynx. That's 1, 2, 3, 4 still. So you can decide to make it plant, small rodent, owl, and lynx. That's another 4 trophic level. So anyone you're able to write in the exam, you get your mark. The basic thing is you should be able to know that it flows using the arrow that represent energy flow. So now let's move. I've explained this. The position of an organism in the food chain of food web or pyramid of biomass or numbers represent um, a trophic level. Now, the next part that the content of our syllabus expects us to know is to describe and explain ecological pyramids. Ecological pyramids, but in this case, they want us to based on, so that we'll look at pyramid of numbers and pyramid of energy. Now, numbers simply mean numbers, is just the total number of organism at a particular trophic level. So why pyramid of energy is a model that shows how energy flow through an ecosystem. So it's a model that shows how energy flow through an ecosystem is referred to as ecological pyramid. Now, pyramid can show the relative amount of energy or biomass, which can be biological mass, or number of organisms at each trophic level in an ecosystem. Now, the base of the trophic level always starts with a producer. Take note. Then each step represents different levels of consumers. Then the number of trophic level in a pyramid is determined by the number of organisms in a certain food chain or food web. So let's look at an example. Energy pyramid. Now, let me use my example. Let me look at if I can look at, let me see. I just want to focus on what is in our syllabus. I don't want to beat around the bush. Let me look at an example. Okay, this place is quite okay. Let me use this space here. Sorry, let me explain something. Now I have organisms. Now let's say I have a food chain called grass to let's say insect, or let's say grasshopper. Just want to explain something shortly. Then let's say birds. Let's say small. Let's just say birds. Now this is first, second, third. So if you want to draw a trophic level, it starts with a producer. So you find out that the producer will be at the base, and in the case of pyramid of energy, the producer, since it makes the energy, it has the highest amount of energy. So let's say 100%. So the amount of energy that you expect to be in a producer will be higher than the amount of energy that will be in a grasshopper. Now, because of the 10% rule, so it's only 10% of the energy produced in grass that will be able to be transferred to the grasshopper. Because the grass itself haven't made his own energy, we use it for metabolic processes. So the energy can be used for respiration, which will produce heat that will be lost to the environment. The energy can also be used for movement. The energy will also be used for photosynthesis to make more biological molecules. So you see, this energy, out of the 100% energy produced, it will use some, and only 10% of this energy will be transferred to the grasshopper. That means the grasshopper will only have 10. If you find 10% of 100 is 10, so only 10% will be transferred. So you find out that if you want to represent it on a food pyramid, and only 10% of this 10 will now be transferred to the birds. So 10% of 10, I think, is just 1. So now if you look at that, plotting it on a pyramid of energy, so the grasshopper, we have the wider base, the grass, because it has the highest amount of energy. In this case, we are looking at 100 kilojoules. And the grasshopper will be next with approximately 10. Let me put GH for grasshopper, 10 kilojoules. Then you find out that the birds, we just have only 1 kilojoules of energy. So you see, this is how sorry, a pyramid of energy is being made, and this is what it actually represent. So it always gives you a pyramid shape. That is what we have here. Now, what these arrows you see on this pyramid represent, it represent loss of energy. So at each trophic level, you find out that energy is lost to the environment. So the producer normally form the first trophic level, this will be the second, this will be the third, and this will be the fourth trophic level. So as the organism move, the amount of energy that is found in this particular food chain will decrease as it moves from the producer up to a top carnivore. So you find out that energy pyramid compare energy used by producers and other organisms on trophic levels, and between each tiers of an energy pyramid, up to 90% of the energy is lost. So when 90% is lost, then only 10% of that energy is transferred to the next tier or the next organism in that trophic level. So your syllabus, so you should look at pyramid of energy. So I'm not explaining the concept of pyramid of biomass, but let me just read it because it might help you. Don't know. Now, pyramid of biomass. Even though a biomass pyramid shows the total mass, so a biomass pyramid helps to show basically the total mass of organism at each level. Now, it doesn't necessarily represent the amount of energy. It has not. It doesn't. So available at each trophic level. For example, the skeleton and beak of a bird will contribute to the biomass, but aren't available for what? Energy. So that's just it, but also have a pyramid shape. Then this will now take us to the next one, which has to do with pyramid of numbers. Now, in the case of pyramid of numbers, it just show the number. Pyramid of numbers show the number of individuals, sorry, the number of individual organisms at each. Pyramid of numbers shows the numbers of individual organisms at each trophic level. So at each trophic level, the number of organisms that is found is called the pyramid of numbers. But it doesn't always have a pyramid shape. Like in this case, you have it has a pyramid shape. So here you have 5,000 producers, 5 million producers. You have 500 primary consumers, 5,000 secondary, and 6 tertiary. So this is the first, second, third, and fourth trophic level. So in this case, it has a pyramid shape, but it doesn't always have a pyramid shape. Now, let me give you an example. Let me say a tree. We have a tree, and on this particular tree, you have insects that feed on the leaves. And these insects are hunted or feed, the energy from the insect flows to birds. So, and the birds themselves, let me add snakes here. So we have 1, 2, and 3, and the fourth trophic level. So what will happen in this case is you find out that you can have a single tree, that's one tree, and we are looking at numbers, and you can have close to, let's say, a 5 million. 5 million insects on that single tree. Then the birds that are coming to feed on that insect, let's say they are 5,000. 500 itself, let's say 500 birds. Then snakes, let me say you have like 5 snakes on that tree. So these are the numbers of organisms. So if you want to plot this on a pyramid, you find out that it will not give you a pyramid shape. So what we are going to have will be organisms that we have a tree. The tree is just one, so it will be the smallest in this case. Then followed by 5 million insect on a single tree. So that would be quite really large. Sorry for my lines. I'm still learning how to use this pen too. I know it will be better with time. Then for the case of birds, we have birds, which is not up to 5 million. Then we have 5 snakes, which will be more than one. So you see, it doesn't always give a pyramid shape because it has to do with the exact numbers of organisms in that particular food chain or in that particular ecosystem. So that being said, the last thing we're looking at now is respiration. You know, there is usually a difference between which most I found that teaching over the years have made me to understand this, that some students don't understand the difference between ventilation, sorry, ventilation, ventilation, um, gas exchange, and respiration. Now, ventilation has to do with inspiration and expiration. Has to do with inspiration and expiration. What do I mean? That it has to do with inhalation, when you take in air and bring out air. That's ventilation. Then gas exchange has to do with the point where oxygen diffuse into your blood and carbon dioxide diffuse out. That is exchange of gases. Then why respiration has to do with the chemical reaction. Now, through ventilation, gas exchange will be able to take place, and through gas exchange, then respiration will be able to take place. So respiration has to do with the use of this oxygen. So it's a chemical reaction. That is why here you find out that we said respiration is a chemical reaction that happens in all living cells. Now it happens in where? The mitochondria of a cell. Happens in the mitochondria. Now, including plant cells and animal cells. So even plants respire. Now, it is the way that energy is released from glucose so that all the other chemical processes needed for life can happen, because energy is needed. So respiration is the process through which it's a chemical reaction that uses oxygen to release energy from glucose. So having understand that, sorry, this video is getting too long. I think let me see, forms of respiration. Now we'll look at this. So there are two types of respiration. You need to know the definition and the symbol equation. That comes out a lot. When we begin to look at past exam question, I'll explain that in detail. So we have aerobic respiration, which is the respiration that involves the use of oxygen. So oxygen is used to break down food molecules to release energy. So glucose is oxidized to release energy. The word equation for aerobic respiration is this. So you need to know this word equation. It comes out. So it is the opposite of photosynthesis. So glucose plus oxygen will give you carbon dioxide plus water. Now, why in photosynthesis it is carbon dioxide plus water will give you glucose plus oxygen? That is in the use of oxygen. Now, why in anaerobic respiration, where most organisms cannot respire without oxygen, but some organisms and tissues can continue to respire if the oxygen runs out. So anaerobic respiration is the type of respiration that takes place in the absence of oxygen. So that is why here glucose is broken down to lactic acid and energy is being released. Now the amount of energy released is quite less than that of aerobic respiration. And if you take note, in this equation for anaerobic respiration, there is no oxygen. It's just glucose to give you lactic acid plus energy release. Now, some plant and some fungi, such as yeast, can respire what? Anaerobically. It's preferably to release less energy but remain alive. So glucose in yeast cell is converted to carbon dioxide and ethanol. So in the case of glucose, glucose will undergo anaerobic respiration to produce ethanol and carbon dioxide. Now, if you're writing IGCSE Environmental Management, you see this one equation, this second equation, and this third equation. Please, you need to jot them somewhere and try and make sure you're able to remember them, because it comes out a lot in the exams. Now, the difference between aerobic and anaerobic respiration, aerobic is in the presence of oxygen. This happens in the absence of oxygen. This has to do with complete oxidation, that's breaking down of this glucose molecule, while this is incomplete, so it produces lactic acid. And the product of respiration is carbon dioxide and water. Why this is lactic acid in the case of mammalian muscles, and in the case of yeast, it produces ethanol and carbon dioxide. Why the amount of energy release is large in this case, but in anaerobic is quite small. So I think I'm going to stop here. I really feel, but I'm going to stop here. Next class, we're going to look at this aspect of the carbon cycle, and every other cycle that you need to know in your exam. I'll just do environmental management, IGCSE, nutrient cycle. I'll do a video on that. So have a nice day. Thank you. And please, and please, and please subscribe to my channel. Subscribe and recommend it to your friends that are writing IGCSE. I just will do my best to make sure at the tail end, when the result comes out, you definitely come back to share your testimonies, because we begin to look at series of past papers that I believe will help you a lot and teach you on the structure and format to answer IGCSE questions.